Now, here's Mr. DeMille with our stars.
It's no secret to most of you that in private life, our stars are Mr. and Mrs. Brian Aherne. And it's no secret to any of you that they gave a fine performance tonight in Suspicion.
Oh, thank you very much, C.B. Joan has been looking forward to weeks to her first visit to the Lux Radio Theater.
And to playing opposite Brian, too, Mr. DeMille.
Sounds as though she married you because she admired your acting, Brian.
Well, that's the best of you I've had yet, C.B. Confidentially, though, I married Joan for her Academy Award. I had a suspicion she'd win it.
Ooh. I think you'd better buy an extra war bond this week, Brian, for a pun like that.
Definitely. What's the news on the front on Hollywood's all-out battle of bonds, Mr. DeMille?
I was talking with headquarters just today, Joan, and the noon communique is we're advancing on all fronts. The goal for the entire industry, you know, is 10% or more of everyone's income for war bonds.
That should buy a lot of tanks and planes, C.B.
About $300,000 worth a week, Brian. Perhaps 100 bombers a year will be paid for by bonds Hollywood will buy through our voluntary payroll savings plan. And that doesn't count our regular cash sales of bonds either.
It sounds like a system that every business might adopt, Mr. DeMille. How is it organized?
The Motion Picture Committee for Hollywood was formed at the request of the Treasury Department to represent every part of the motion picture industry, labor, management, and creative branches. The producer with 4 telephones and 3 secretaries is no more important than the carpenter who builds the set or the electrician who lights it. We need everybody. You know, at a meeting the other day, the 2 best suggestions were made by a lovely extra girl who just come from the set in makeup and a man who just come from the same set in overalls.
In other words, Hollywood's payroll savings plan is democracy at work to sell war bonds.
Like that carpenter I was talking about, Brian, you hit the nail on the head. In a few weeks, we expect to tell the Treasury Department that every actor, stenographer, writer, musician, makeup man, costumer, hairdresser, executive, business manager, agent, cameraman, sound technician, director, carpenter, clerk, electrician, and set dresser has signed up. That every man and woman who works in motion pictures and the allied branches of the industry is in the payroll savings plan and is voluntarily putting at least 10% of his or her salary in United States war bonds. Not just this week or this month, but every payday for the duration of the war.
And it's one production with a starring part for everyone.
Well, who's starring here in the Lux Radio Theater next week, C.B.?
First, let me tell you the play, Brian. It's Frederick Lonsdale's famous comedy, The Last of Mrs. Cheney. And our stars will be Norma Shearer, Walter Pidgeon, and Adolphe Menjou. The Last of Mrs. Cheney ran a whole season on Broadway and twice made a hit in motion pictures. I fully expect it to keep up that brilliant record here next Monday night with a cast like Norma Shearer, Walter Pidgeon, and Adolphe Menjou.
Well, that play is one of my favorites, C.B. Thank you and good night.
Good night, Mr. DeMille.
Good night. Good night. Remember, a bond every payday keeps the actors away. Our sponsors, the makers of Lux Flakes, join me in inviting you to be with us again next Monday night when the Lux Radio Theater presents Norma Shearer, Walter Pidgeon, and Adolphe Menjou in The Last of Mrs. Cheney. This is Cecil B. DeMille saying good night to you from Hollywood.
Ladies and gentlemen, modern medical science can cure cancer if the disease is discovered early. The Women's Field Army of the American Society for the Control of Cancer deserves your support in its campaign to spread knowledge of cancer control. Joan Fontaine appeared tonight through the courtesy of David O. Selznick and will soon be seen in the title role of the David O. Selznick production, Jane Eyre. Brian Aherne, star of Columbia Pictures, will be seen in their production of Salute to Sahara. Nigel Bruce appeared through the courtesy of Universal Pictures. His next picture is Universal's Sherlock Holmes Saves London. Heard in tonight's play were Jill Esmond as Isabel, Vernon Steele as General McLeodlaw, Gloria Gordon as Mrs. McLeodlaw, John Abbott as Melbeck, and Eric Snowden, Claire Verdera, and Pax Walter. The Lux Radio Theater is shortwave to American armed forces throughout the world. Tune in next Monday night to hear Norma Shearer, Walter Pidgeon, and Adolphe Menjou in The Last of Mrs. Cheney. Our music was conducted by Louis Silvers, and your announcer has been Melville Ruick. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.